Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, I'm Patrick Donohoe, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. Members of the IFA are voting to elect their new president, and we had the three candidates here for a live broadcast debate on Friday night last. Our editor, Justin McCarthy, started by asking them about their priority to address shrinking farm incomes. Here's Henry Burns' answer, followed by Joe Healy, and then Flor McCarthy.
The first thing is, when the government is formed, hopefully there'll be a Minister for Agriculture, we have to put massive pressure on for an autumn budget to get an increase in the agriculture budget. So we can first regrow some of the schemes. The average to small farmer took a huge hit in the cut in reps, the cut in the disadvantaged area payment, cuts in suckler payments at the time, which are partly regrown. Those are huge schemes for the average to small farmer. Some of those farmers have taken a 50% cut in income because of those income schemes cuts. And the very least we need to see in the budget is an attempt to regrow those schemes. And around the compliance, we need to make that simpler for farmers so there's less stress there. And then with the whole thing around supermarkets and regulation of supermarkets, I definitely think that the 67%, farm income being 67% of what it is in 95, there's no coincidence with that, with the concentration of power at supermarket level.
The start would be to get the ANC payments restored to pre-2008 levels. Farmers took the hit in the bad times. We listened right through the recent general election, the government telling us that the recovery was there and we just had to keep it going. Let's see a small bit of that recovery and let the farmer be restored to what they were. So that would be a start. We need the various schemes that are there, the GLAS scheme to be of an amount that farmers feel worthwhile going into, and also have it more farmer friendly. And while I'm on the schemes, I think the genomic scheme for the cows, what I've called for every night, is a farmer friendly scheme, and a scheme that returns €200 per suckler cow. And, people can argue that up and down. They might say that it should be front-loaded or, that's maybe for another day, but we at least get it there. And the €20 per ewe, that has to be seen as a demand and a necessity and not just a wish.
I think I take a new approach on the dairy side especially. We have to become less understanding why, like the Glanbias, the Kerrys, we can see at the moment they're increasing their profits at a time when our farmers' incomes are going on the floor. So I think we need to approach this in a different way. As our president, I will be going to them saying what we need to stay in business, the family farm. And I'll be emphasising that the CEOs, the boards of these co-ops, will have to return a higher price to the farmers out of these high-end products at the time of price challenge like we have at the moment. And the major commodity would be the beef side of the thing. I think the first thing I would be doing is I'd be going for 4 regional meetings on the beef thing, trying to pull the finishers in, and we have to attack the issues that are important to these beef farmers, because this is not sustainable to be producing beef at the moment at 370 or 380 and the weight limits. We need a plan where we are going with our industry. I have to emphasise the whole time, across all our industries, we need a plan. Whether we can achieve the plan, we must set the bar high.
We also received many questions from our readers for the candidates, including this one, answered by Flor McCarthy, then Joe Healy, and finally Henry Burns.
Just an interesting question in there from a reader. Have we too many marts in the country? Just yes or no?
I suppose we have. But, a lot of these marts trade seasonal as well. There's big marts there in the seasonal time of the year. So they are providing a service, but actually having 7 in Kerry is fairly crazy that we actually have 7 marts in the county. But they all seem to be trading fairly strongly at the moment, which is a positive from a farmer's point of view.
Joe, you should be well positioned.
Yeah, I think we have too many marts, because what buyers want when they come to a mart is a large selection. And I think the smaller marts are losing out at times that they don't.
I don't think we have, actually, Justin, because they're providing a valuable service in a local area. They're a small margin business, often owned by farmers, but kept going. The infrastructure was put there by our forefathers, and they are kept going. Like our own mart at home would be an example. It did struggle for a few years, but now it's a very vibrant weanling and store cattle mart again.
Finally, let's hear from the three candidates on their proposals to reform the IFA. First Flor, then Henry, and finally Joe.
Well, Justin, what we have to do is, what I see from most farmers at this stage, they want to see IFA getting back working. That's the big issue out there. We obviously need to bring all parts of the organisation with us. I think I'm uniquely positioned to that. I farm across a lot of different land types. At first, we have to try to unite the organisation, get it moving, and get it working on behalf of farmers. Obviously, we need full transparency from here forward. How much people are putting in, where the money is going. And under my leadership, there will be no money going astray. We have a unique opportunity also to take back IFA to the farmers. It is our organisation to set up for farmers. The organisation wasn't being controlled by us farmers. That will have to be a cornerstone as we move forward over the next number of years. I won't attempt to set my wage. That was where we got us to where we are here today. I believe strongly either the President or the General Secretary shouldn't be involved in setting their wage. Obviously, Council must be involved, but they need expert advice from outside.
For the confidence of the membership, Justin, I don't believe we have anything to hide, first of all. And I think the first thing, openness, is it will do us any of us any harm. For the membership on the ground, that is the big disappointment, is the lack of openness and the length it takes to flesh things out. I think the next thing is clearly our structures for a modern organisation. It's not a business, that's a representative organisation that needs to be run business-like from the point of view of its finances. We need to have an open structure now that people can see what's going on very clearly. And on the payment, I think, the President, I think there was a huge disappointment in the perception of what the President was getting from the point of view of that it was the return for a farm manager home. That was always the perception, that was always the understood. And I think there's a mistrust in the membership on that now, and I think it has to return there. It can't be a profit-making exercise. I'm very clear in that.
I think a lot of it is to do with transparency, communication and delivery, and to have the members reconnecting with the organisation. I think we're seeing at the moment, Justin, now, just how serious, and some people might think that it's not as serious as it is, but we see a lot of apathy even in the voting around the country. Words that's coming back in from the various counties is that turnout is low. So I think that we need to ensure that the members on the ground feel a reconnect with the organisation. I think that one way of helping that is to have a more vibrant branch network, a branch network that's meeting at least 3 to 4 times per year, because where they're only meeting once per year, it's really nothing more than a report on the year's work of IFA.
So on salaries, just to keep it fair in all three?
Yeah, well, look, I'd be satisfied if the farm labour was covered and vouched expenses paid for, but in any case, there's the remuneration committee there, and I agree with the President not sitting on that committee. The President should never sit on a committee that's dealing with his salary or her salary, and that the salary of the person that they'll be expected to work very closely and professionally with over their term.
The Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Now on to the other election. My colleague Anthony Jordan continues to speak with members of the new Dáil to see how farming and rural policy might shape up under the next government. Don't miss his full report in next week's Irish Farmers Journal. This week he spoke with Fine Gael TD for Kildare South, Martin Heydon.
In terms of crime in rural areas, Martin, where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, look, I think the measures taken in by Minister Francis Fitzgerald last year in relation to Operation Tor were really, really important to address the issues around burglary and crime. And the CSO figures that came out last week have shown a 26% reduction in burglary in the last quarter of last year, and 5% down overall annually is really encouraging. And like for €5 million, which is what the budget was for Tor, it was money really well spent. Crime in general, look, in my constituency I had 2 rural Garda stations closed. That was really difficult. One of them was very close to me at home. But my view now, as the country continues to recover and as we hopefully get a few more quid, a bit more money in the kitty to spend, is to increase Garda resources and increase Garda numbers. I don't believe that necessarily open up Garda stations again is an answer. If we have extra money and capacity, it should be put in first and foremost to churning more out of Templemore, along with the 1100 we've got out already. And it was really, really important that Fine Gael reopened Templemore after it was closed by Fianna Fáil in 2009. But it's also about, I have some very close friends who are Gardaí, and I know the difficult conditions with which they're working. They still do an awful lot of stuff with pen and paper, and there's a lot of money needs to be spent on ICT, and obviously then on high-powered cars and on better resources to allow the Gardaí to do the work as well as they can.
Broadband's a massive issue at the moment, and in some areas that it's people feel that it's not being provided. That was a feedback during the election. What is your thoughts on this?
Broadband is without a doubt the biggest issue in rural South Kildare, as far as I'm concerned, and that came across. I didn't need to canvass to know that was a big issue, but definitely it has been. You go outside of the main urban conurbations, and this is down to flawed policy by previous governments in the past, where they were happy to leave this to the private operators to roll out broadband services and not use any state funding. And the difficulty with that is that the private operators do what you would expect them to do, is pick off the larger urban conurbations and leave the one-off house in rural Ireland till the very end, if at all. So we have always felt that this is going to take direct state aid to go in here. The Department of Finance is not used to doing this and hasn't done it in the past, and we're the first government that in the last capital plan for the next 5 years, unveiled just before Christmas, we set aside €264 million to be ploughed into the rural broadband scheme, and this will see us deliver 30 meg high-speed rural broadband to every house in the country by 2020 and 85% of the houses in the country by 2018 if we stick on target. That process has been tendered at the minute. You mentioned the election. This didn't come quick enough for people in the election, and it is hugely frustrating. I have people who live in my constituency in Kildare South who commute to Dublin who could definitely do a day or two a week working from home, who have businesses that they would like to operate out of home, and they can't do it because of lack of broadband provision. Never mind the fact that we have children now in schools with iPads, and a lot of their projects are online, but they come home in the evenings and they don't have the ability to do that.
Anthony also met Lisa Chambers, Fáil TD for Mayo.
What is your standing on issues in rural Ireland at the moment, such as crime?
Yeah, crime is definitely a big issue, and it has become more prominent in the last number of years. We have conflicting information. On one hand, you hear figures coming out from government saying that we have had a reduction in burglaries, but the feeling certainly across Mayo is that burglaries are as prevalent as they ever were. People do not feel safe in their homes. There's a feeling among people that they have to protect their own property, that if you call the Gardaí because numbers are so decimated and because stations have been closed, that the chances of a Garda getting to you on time are quite slim. And that's just the perception out there, that's the feeling. And when you do have people coming back to say, well, the figures are dropping, the reality is that if somebody doesn't feel safe in their home, figures aren't going to keep them safe at night. And when we've closed, when we've seen the closure in Mayo, we've seen the closure of 10 rural Garda stations in the last 5 years, and that has left gaping holes on a geographic basis in the county, where you have vast areas without any Garda cover, and the travel time from the nearest Garda station is actually quite large. So it does breed fear, and the feeling among people is that they don't have access to enough Garda cover and security within the county to deal with issues in crime, whether that be burglaries, whether it be assaults, whatever. Certainly people do not feel safe in their homes.
Do you think people in rural areas have been treated unfairly by kind of the funding that they're getting in terms of these kind of issues?
Well, we've had a number of Garda stations closed across the country, and the annual saving nationally was $500,000 approximately, which in government terms, from money terms, is actually very small. So the savings, when you think about, say, closing a rural Garda station, somewhere, some location in Mayo, all you're really saving is the electricity cost, maybe the heating cost, because that guard that was working there is just redeployed elsewhere. So payroll is always the biggest cost. So when you try and balance that and you think, well, is it actually justifiable to save such a small amount of money but to leave an entire village in an area uncovered by a Garda station? In my view, it's not justifiable. I'm in favour of streamlining services. I'm in favour of becoming more efficient, using our resources as wisely as we possibly can. But certainly I think that decisions were taken very quickly without much forethought for what the impact will be in terms of communities and the feeling among communities about being safe. That wasn't factored in my view, as much as it should have been. The main message coming back to me on the doorsteps throughout the campaign, obviously health was a big issue, jobs were a big issue, but broadband was equally as big an issue. It is a massive impediment to investment in the region, it's a massive impediment to job creation, and it's an impediment for attracting people to locate and live in the west of Ireland and in rural communities. Broadband is no longer a luxury, it is an absolute necessity to your daily living. People use it now to access services, whether that be banking services, doctor services, they use it to pay their bills, they use it for education purposes. We can no longer sit back and have these 5-year, 10-year plans for putting broadband in. It has to be an immediate action, and it has to be a priority for this government.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Now, let's take a look at farm safety from the point of view of those who are first at the scene when the worst happens. David Hennelly is an ambulance crew member, and he spoke with our news correspondent Odile Evans, who reports on the work of paramedics in farm accidents in this week's Irish Farmers Journal.
I'm an advanced paramedic with the National Ambulance Service. Over the years you come across a lot of different types of accidents on farms, everything from animal injuries or animal attacks to injuries involving machinery like PTOs or, baling equipment and the likes. But also there's the more common things, the likes of the falls from heights that, wouldn't necessarily be perceived as something that may just happen on a farm, can happen anywhere really. But also we tend to get a lot of equestrian accidents. The advice that the National Emergency Operations Centre give over the phone is really important to actually listen to. And in an emergency, the difficulty is at times people can get very impatient and find it difficult to actually listen to what they're being told to do and take steps to make the place safer. The biggest thing for us is, I suppose, if animals have been involved, or even animals around the farm like dogs, things like that, they're all put away in a safe place, as well as the actual animal that may have caused the injury. Particularly from my point of view as well, I work a bit on the helicopter, and if there's a helicopter coming into land, we don't want to disturb animals quite a lot. So what we'll be looking for is our landing zone to be free of horses or animals as well. And so that's something that could be happening before our arrival. The other thing about making an area safe would obviously be about shutting down or shutting off equipment. I think farmers have a huge amount of expertise in using their own equipment that we, as a service, we wouldn't necessarily have the expertise unless you come from a farming background yourself. In relation to actually things you can do with the actual patient or the person who's been hurt, what tends to happen is you will get advice on the phone as to what to do. If it's the worst case scenario, like someone's heart has stopped, like a cardiac arrest, they will talk you through how to do chest compressions and how to do that process. If it's a medical emergency on a farm, like someone having a heart attack or maybe a stroke, they can actually talk you through how to give the first line medication and help that person, or how to position them and so on. And again, similar if it's a trauma case, if there's a lot of bleeding on that, the guys on the other side of the phone can talk you through the process of how to manage that and help stem the flow of blood until the arrival of the emergency services. We learn so much from the farmers themselves in relation to what they come across, but also we can help educate them into little steps that they can do to make their work practice safer, or if an incident has happened, how to deal with it.
Prevention is better than the cure though, and farming students get solid grounding in farm safety nowadays. Second year Ag Science students in UCD were doing their farm safety practicals last Friday. My colleague Anthony Jordan went back to his home college to talk to the range of experts who prepare them for the dangers of farming life.
I'm here with Aoife Osborne. Aoife, what's your role here today?
So my role is I'm the FBD lecturer for Farm Health and Safety in the School of Agriculture and Food Science in UCD. So part of my role is I teach the Safety, Welfare and Health module to all second year students. So second year students must attend and pass this module before they go on professional work experience in third year, and it equips them with the knowledge and the skills that they need to carry out professional work experience safely.
Just in terms of we all hear about the fatalities, but there's much more than this, the injuries and everything else that happens afterwards. Talk about your role in explaining the injuries that are occurring in these farming accidents.
Yes, so fatalities among farming are, recorded, and we know exactly, the statistics in them, but there is a huge underreporting of the accidents and the injuries that we don't know about. My own research on health of farmers, it indicated that the biggest health problems among farmers is lower back pain. So today I'm here and I'm doing a demonstration on manual handling, advising students on how to protect their back and to teach them about good manual handling procedures, and to give them the knowledge and skills that they might need going forward in their everyday life.
I'm here with John McNamara, who's the Health and Safety Officer with Teagasc and also a lecturer in Health and Safety in UCD. John, what is your role here today?
I'm doing a practical demonstration with students on basically on power shaft and machinery safety.
And talk to me about the statistics. You mentioned that PTO number or fatalities are down. What are the other risks involved?
Yeah, I'm glad to say that for maybe 5 years now, power shaft fatalities, a power shaft fatality hasn't happened, but we can never say never that they're horrific injuries, and we want to prevent them. Now, what is happening though is people are getting crushed by tractors and machinery and falls from bales, and that's what we want to emphasise also.
In terms of this year, what are the statistics looking like?
One fatality or serious injury is always one too many. So far for the first quarter there have been 3 fatalities. Last year there was 18 fatalities, and in 2014 there was 30 fatalities. So we seem to be moving in the right direction, but we must be on our guard and we must always be watching out for dangerous situations.
I'm here with Dermot Ruan. Dermot, what's the importance of staging an event like this for students?
Well, in UCD here we have 300 students who go out on practical work experience every year, and there's a serious educational requirement for them to be at least familiar, and as familiar as possible, with what they may encounter when they're in practical work experience on farms or in companies or in forestry or elsewhere. So this is part of the preparation process for us. It's a part of our duty of care to them, and we just make sure that as far as possible they are as well educated in this field as we can make them.
I'm here with Arthur Byrne, Public Safety Manager with the ESB Networks. Arthur, what is it that you want to achieve today?
Well, I'm here today to talk to agricultural students from UCD who are second year, who are just going out on their placement module, and it's important that we emphasise the importance of safety, and particularly from my point of view the importance of electrical safety, because sadly there have been serious accidents, in some cases fatalities, involving electricity when people are farming, and the idea today is to educate and raise awareness among the younger people about how to be safe near electricity.
And it's not just fatalities that are the problem with electricity either. There are other also issues regarding electricity on Irish farms.
Yeah, I suppose, Anthony, in the case of farm accidents in particular, there's been sadly too many fatal accidents, but thankfully they haven't been involved electricity in the last couple of years, but there have been huge near misses. Like as recently as 3 weeks ago, there was a timber person cutting timber on a farm who was electrocuted cutting the timber. A couple of years back there was a fatality involving a power washer, and I suppose there's been an awful lot of near misses where people doing things, not replacing the electrical installation on the farm, not watching out when they're using ladders coming in contact or even coming close to contact with the electricity wires that give the people a shock. And the problem with electricity is you don't get a second chance with electricity. Like lots of other things, you get a second chance, but not with electricity.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Meanwhile, our market specialist Fáil O'Neill was in Norway this week. The country is not part of the European Union, and the Norwegians have their own way of managing agriculture. Let's hear more from Heydon Gegendal of the Norwegian Farmers Union.
Heydon, just to please explain to me, for the benefit of Irish listeners, farming in Norway is completely different to most areas within the European Union and indeed most areas across the world. You have a fairly protected market, and you also support farming through negotiations with government on an annual basis.
Yes, since we're outside the European Union, we have our own agriculture policy, and that means that we are able to have a tailor-made policy that will fit the traits of the Norwegian agriculture. And to make this function, we are dependent on having some level of protection and tariffs towards the EU market. That's where the greatest imports come from. We have a system of target prices, we have market regulations where the cooperatives are the responsible, and we also have rules about ownership of land that is very important, and we have annual negotiations with the state.
And a big part of the reason that the Norwegian government have these policies in place, Norway is a high-cost production system for farm produce, is that correct?
Yes, that is right. We have very high costs of both input to the farmer and wages. And also we have quite challenging climate conditions and also working plots and areas for the farmers. We have lots of difficult areas to farm. We have a difficult topography, high mountains, deep fjords and so on.
It's actually as little as 3% of the landmass of Norway that's suitable for agriculture, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And then of those 3%, just 2% are for grassland mainly, and then 1% for grains. So we have a policy where we try to make it easier to produce grains in certain areas where you are able to produce grains, and then we want to have more of an animal production in areas where you're not it's not able to produce grain.
So is national agriculture policy and national government agriculture policy, it is tailor-made to the regions as opposed to a one-size-fits-all for the entire country? Because it is a huge country. You tell me that it stretches for, if you start in Oslo, to head to the north of Norway, you will be in Rome as quickly if you head the same direction southways. So obviously you have different climate zones within that. You have different land types, you have different soil types, you have different climates, I presume. So therefore you will have some areas that are much more productive than others.
Yes, that's right. And then we try to fit the policy into this. You get different subsidies depending on where you're producing. So you get more subsidies if you produce in areas where it's more difficult to produce.
Okay, so
and you get more support for your first cows than your last cows. So the smaller farms gets more.
So you target the support very much then. The greatest amount of support is available for the most difficult production environment on one level, and for the smallest farms with the smallest number of cattle or livestock units on the other.
Yeah.
That has been the policy, I understand, in Norway since after the Second World War. Obviously, it's a very wealthy nation with oil revenue, but it had been policy before that, although you may not have had the same amount of resource to support it. Do you visualise that arrangement continue on into the future?
Yes, I think so. I think that it's a strong support among the consumers, among the Norwegian people, to have agriculture production, even though we could have imported it more cheaply. I think the Norwegian people wants to have national production for national consumption. Most of what we produce goes to the national consumption, and I think our consumers want that to continue.
So you cannot foresee Norwegian farmers wanting the common agriculture policy being Norwegian policy anytime soon?
No.
Thank you very much.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Back home in Kerry, one of the first locally led agro-environmental schemes is working with farmers to save precious local species of freshwater mussel. Odile Evans found out more with Karen O'Neill, one of the scientists working on the project, and from a Kerry farm herself.
My project in particular is based on looking at how the sediment eroding from agriculture and forestry land is affecting the freshwater pearl mussel. The thing is that the juvenile freshwater pearl mussel is affected by soil erosion on land because the soil or the sediment clogs up their habitat and it's fatal because of oxygen depletion. So my project is kind of in three parts. The first is that I will measure exactly how much sediment is coming out of these catchments or sub-catchments per year, and that will help us understand the extent of the problem. And then my second part is that I'm doing something really interesting called sediment fingerprinting, which is collect soil or sediment in the rivers and on land, and then we use lab analysis to match them up. And that will be really important for Kerry Life, because we can say that, X proportion of sediment in the river is coming from, for example, agriculture or from forestry. And then the third is just that I'm going to look at habitat analysis.
Why is the freshwater pearl mussel important?
The way I think of it, it's broader than the freshwater pearl mussel. The freshwater pearl mussel is a sort of an indicator of good health of a habitat, and if the freshwater pearl mussel is declining, as it is all over Ireland, it's a sign that our once clean habitats are becoming less clean, and I think that's something that concerns everyone, not just farmers. If this indicator of good ecosystem health is declining, then our ecosystem health overall is declining. At the end, we're hoping to pick up the results of these changes, and that will help Kerry Life see what is effective and maybe what's not effective.
And you said your parents are farming?
Yeah, it's in Glencarry, which is in the Carra catchment, which is actually, we're working in two catchments, the Carra catchment and the Kerry Blackwater. So my parents are actually also in the Kerry Life scheme. They're Kerry Life applicants, as is my brother. So we're kind of involved at all levels. We've discussed a couple of different things. We've discussed maybe changing the breed of sheep that we have, and then just generally what everyone else is doing, trying not to have our feeders in the same place. constantly, and maintaining our farm tracks. And I think there's talk of decommissioning our dipping tanks, but that all these things are optional, so my parents will probably pick and choose.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Finally, if you're thinking of spring cleaning, the good resolution should apply to your credit card bills. Irish Country Living's consumer editor Ciara Leahy explained how the costs add up and why you should shop around for credit cards in this week's paper. And she shares some of her tips with Mary Phelan.
Lots of people say, oh, you know, my bank gave me 1 year ago, I've never thought of changing it. And if that phrase sounds familiar to you, there's a good chance you could be paying far too much for your credit card, especially if you're someone that doesn't pay off your bill on time.
So how do you find out if you've got the best deal or if you don't have the best deal, more importantly?
Look, the days of ringing around banks or at the same time ringing around, you know, TV providers or electricity providers, they are gone because there's so many websites out there that will help you compare. Consumerhelp.ie, run by the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, that's the CCPC, they help you compare the credit card rates. And I suppose the most important thing you need to consider, first off, is your APR. So that's the amount of interest you'll pay annually. This also takes into account your stamp duty and other regular charges. So currently the best deal that you'll find in the market at the moment for APRs is AIB with their Click Visa credit card. That APR is coming in at 13.6. But if you've got an AIB credit card and you're thinking, right, okay, that's great, I'm fine, you really have to look closely because the B MasterCard and the B Visa card, also by AIB, actually have the highest APRs on the market at 22.7%.
It's quite scary that the lowest APR, the best value one out there, is 13.6%. It's shocking.
Absolutely.
When you actually start looking into it. But with such a difference, would you be saying to people, obviously, get the Click Visa credit card from AIB?
Well, see, the thing is, you need to look at it as well. And it's not just taking account of the APRs. You need to look at their introductory offers. So, for example, if you really want to stick with AIB, the B MasterCard and the B Visa cards might have the highest APR, but they have an introductory offer whereby you only pay 3.83% for the first 12 months. I mean, after that, once you've availed of that for 12 months, that really low interest rate, then you can switch over to the Click card at the 13.6. So you're really being a bit smarter about your APRs and getting the best deal.
Okay, but could you not get introductory offers with other banks apart from AIB?
Absolutely, Mary. And although we mentioned AIB there, you actually will get better rates if you look at some of the credit cards being offered by Bank of Ireland, KBC, Permanent TSB or Ulster Bank, even Tesco. They have credit cards with a 0% introductory rate for 6 months. Bank of Ireland's actually extends to 7 months. And I suppose this is really important if you've got a fairly hefty bill that you're really, really struggling to pay off. You know, not only are you trying to pay off that amount, but you're facing steep interest rates every month. So basically, what we did in this week's Consumer Pages is I took an example, Tom O'Sullivan. He has a balance of €2,000 on his credit card. He can only afford to pay off €300 a month, but this means each month he's still accruing interest every month. So he currently has an Ulster Bank Gold MasterCard, which has an APR of 19.2. Now, it's not the best rate on the market, but he certainly doesn't have the worst either. If he was to transfer to Bank of Ireland's Platinum Advantage credit card, his APR would be 19.6. Not a massive difference overall, but he'll have that important introductory offer. By just making this switch, he will actually make a saving of €131. He'll be still paying off the same amount. It's still the overall amount is going to be the same. He'll still be paying off his €300, but by not having that interest clocking up for 7 months, he will be saving that amount, and also he'll get it paid off a month faster than he would. He'd get it paid off in 7 months versus 8 months by sticking by his current credit card.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It does. It makes a big difference.
But you don't just look at APRs in the article. What are the other factors people should take into account when looking at credit cards?
Just look at the late payment fees as well. If you're someone that's not going to pay off your bill on time every month, AIB and KBC will charge you €7 for late payments. Ulster Bank can charge as much as €8.50. So that's important to consider as well.
Okay, and do you have any other final tips or advice for our readers about credit cards in general?
Well, I think one thing that's really handy if you're looking at clearing your credit card is consumerhelp.ie have a clearing your credit card ready reckoner, and this basically lets you see how long it's going to take you to pay off your credit card and compare it to switching to another credit card, how it's going to help in a situation like Tom's. The other thing as well, I suppose, is important to talk about when we're discussing credit cards. All these fees that we're talking about, Mary, they can all be avoided if you keep on top of your payments. Try and pay off your monthly bill in full, and you can avoid them all. If this isn't possible though, make sure you're paying off the minimum fee. It might only be 10 or 15 euros a month, but it will ensure that your credit card does not affect your credit rating. And this is really, really important, just to make sure that that minimum amount is coming out of your account every month.
Okay, Ciara, brilliant. I am certainly taking a lot of that on board myself, so thanks a million.
Great, thanks Mary.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.